It'll have been quite a while ago at this point, but I remember a pretty distinct period earlier this year where a whole swath of VTubers jumped on the video game Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, with many of them experiencing the anime story through this game for the very first time. There were a lot of clips of them reacting to iconic scenes and climactic moments recreated in the game. And as a fan of Dragon Ball myself, I obviously saw a bunch of these show up in my recommended as well. It was an interesting phenomenon to me because while I was certainly aware of Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, I never considered the idea of someone getting into Dragon Ball's story through it. Anime games, by which I mean games based on popular anime franchises, are by no means unfamiliar to most people. Unfortunately, they also don't have the best reputation among most gamers, with many looking at them as cheaply made cash grabs that only appeal to gamers that were already fans of the source material. Unless it's a fighting game like Dragon Ball FighterZ or Hunter x Hunter Nen Impact, where knowledge of the story is not as important as the gameplay or the mechanics, it's pretty rare to see someone play a game based on an anime they'd never seen before. That's why it was so interesting to me to see a bunch of people jump on Kakarot even though they'd never seen Dragon Ball, reaction potential notwithstanding. I was so curious in fact that I decided to check out the game myself to see just how good it was at telling Dragon Ball's story in the first place. Kakarot has obviously already been out for quite a few years now, but I never really bothered to jump into the game during its release. The reason was pretty simple. In my eyes, it was just another Dragon Ball game, and I had played more than my fair share of those. Dragon Ball Z Budokai was the first Dragon Ball game I had ever played, and while it was fun enough for a simple arena fighter with minimal mechanics, its story mode was incredibly pared down, focusing mostly on a few core fights in the series, which honestly leaves you with a fairly myopic version of the anime's narrative. The game's coverage of the story would improve as it went on from Budokai to Budokai Tenkaichi, and there were other more narrative-focused games like the Legacy of Goku series as well. Even so, my general experience with the Dragon Ball games was that while they were fun, they were little more than watered-down adaptations of the anime, and honestly, I had experienced the anime story more than enough times without having to include all these other games. Still, Kakarot is quite a different beast compared to your usual anime game. While it still carries the DNA of an arena fighter, it's much closer to an action RPG, with tons of open world exploration and side content to do aside from just reliving the story of Dragon Ball Z. Kakarot allows you to roam the world of Dragon Ball as your favorite characters, where you can go on little adventures, tackle side quests, and just immerse yourself in one of your favorite anime. With tons of little callbacks, references, and cameos, it's pretty clear that Kakarot is a huge love letter to the series as a whole. And even if I think the core combat gameplay is still kind of bad, it doesn't diminish how much Kakarot indulges the fantasy of living in the world of Dragon Ball. Of course, that's not really our focus right now. Our focus is on how Kakarot tells the story of Dragon Ball Z, and whether it can really replicate the experience of watching the anime. It certainly does a pretty good job of trying. The game's developer, CyberConnect 2, has become pretty well known for creating some incredible 3D renders of iconic anime scenes, and that merit is on full display here in Kakarot. If there's an iconic, classic scene in Dragon Ball Z, you can bet that it is recreated here in-game with incredible accuracy and authenticity, as well as a cinematic flair that can sometimes surpass the quality of the original anime. Not every scene hits as exactly as it does in the original, but the majority of them do, and for a video game story, even one coming out in the 2020s, that's pretty good. At the end of the day though, Kakarot is still a game, and its priorities still lie in being a game rather than being a faithful retelling of its source material. What that means is that it's really only a few big, major scenes that get the cinematic 3D treatment, while the less iconic ones are portrayed with a lot less flair if they're not cut out entirely or implied to have happened during gameplay. For example, I'm surprised by just how many non-fights in the anime were turned into full-blown fights in the game, a decision that helped neither my enjoyment of the game's combat nor its story's pacing. Aside from that though, story flow is a more important element of storytelling than most people give credit for, and without it, even the most iconic and emotional moments can lack the right tension or energy. You can't have a story with only big moments, you have to have the little moments in between too. All this is to say that Kakarot is no replacement for the real thing, but that doesn't really matter. Kakarot was never made with the intention of replacing its source material, rather it's more about celebrating it. I mean hell, most people playing the game have already experienced the story anyway, and don't necessarily want to have the exact same experience. They want an experience that they can only have in the realm of video games, while pulling from the anime they've become such a big fan of. Kakarot provides that experience and more. There are also experiences that you can have in Kakarot that you can't have through the anime. As an open-world action RPG, Kakarot gives you a much wider view of the world than the anime is able to. As long as Dragon Ball Z can be, it's also a very focused story, and it doesn't always have a lot of time for anything that's not directly related to the main plot, occasional filler episode notwithstanding. In Kakarot, meanwhile, you can spend whole hours just traveling the world doing whatever you like. The story will always wait for you, and there's a lot of little activities to sink your time into as well. All things considered, I still consider Kakarot to be only slightly above average as a video game, but that still puts it squarely atop many other anime games of its kind. It's unfortunately very rare for an anime game to be positively received, and even the ones that aren't derided as utter garbage are only really appreciated by fans of the source material. It's funny because it's not like anime are the only intellectual properties to be adapted into the medium of video games, but if we're talking about games as an art form, you'd be laughed out of the discussion if you even tried to bring up an anime game. This is unfortunately not a perspective that is completely groundless. A metric ton of anime games have been hitting the games market for decades, and frankly, very few of them have left their mark in history. Most of them are usually pretty simple arena fighters, like the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm series, which happened to also be developed by CyberConnect 2. Like Kakarot, the best of the Ninja Storm series showcases some of the most amazing cinematics you'll see in video games, created with exacting accuracy and attention to detail. Unfortunately, that's also kind of all it has. The combat is middling and very simple, and while you can play with friends, it really isn't good for anything other than setting up a bunch of dream matches. What sucks is that I'm describing most anime games when I say that. It doesn't matter if it's a One Piece game or a My Hero game or even a Dragon Ball game. Anime games have been in a rut because they're almost always giving you a pretty similar experience every time. A mediocre fighter with simple controls and a bare-bones story mode that only really holds value for fans of the series. At best, you can still have fun mashing your fan favorites together, but at worst, you can end up with complete disasters like Jump Force. I know that most people who actually like anime games don't really care too much about all of the criticism. For a lot of them, a game that panders to the fandom and does little else is just what they wanted. And if non-fans can't really find a way to get into the game, well, they couldn't really care less. The games aren't made for them anyway. For me though, I've always wondered why anime games always have a hard time coming out with a quality experience. I mean, I like anime. I like video games. The two things coming together should be a dream come true, and yet the only anime game I can think of that managed to garner a reception stronger than lukewarm is Dragon Ball FighterZ from Arc System Works. Not only was this a fighting game developed by a team that actually knew how to make fighting games, but it also had incredible art direction and a strong pseudo 2D aesthetic that made it stand out. When it comes to other anime games, even other anime fighting games, it's hard to see that kind of uniqueness present itself. Still, what Kakarot showed me is that while anime games are certainly struggling to be anything more than cheap cash grabs, it doesn't always have to be this way. Kakarot is a game for Dragon Ball fans for sure, but it's still got a lot of value in it outside of that. I think the fact that all these VTubers enjoyed their experience with the game, despite several of them never having experienced the original anime, is proof enough. The gameplay experience has also widened quite a bit. Instead of a simple anime fighter, we've got a real RPG in Kakarot, and that certainly gives you a lot more to do with the game than just mash buttons with your favorite character. It's true that I don't love Kakarot, but there's no denying that it's a way more interesting game than past Dragon Ball games, or even newer entries like Sparking Zero. But then again, Kakarot is a game based on one of my favorite manga and anime series of all time. While I think I approach the game with more than enough objectivity, there's always a chance that I still have a bias towards the game that makes me enjoy it more than someone who isn't a fan of the original anime. So I decided to check out one more game, in particular, one based on an anime that I had never seen before. I'd play the game blind and see if I could get anything out of it without having to experience the anime first. I ended up landing on Sword Art Online, Alicization Lycoris, an action RPG based on the third season of the Sword Art Online anime, covering the Alicization arc. I have only ever seen 3 episodes of the original anime, so I figured there was no better choice for this little experiment of mine. To be honest, I only played Alicization Lycoris, which I'm just going to call Lycoris, for a few hours, but that was still enough for me to get a pretty good sense of the gameplay experience. To be honest, Lycoris is a pretty middling action RPG. The combat is simple, and while there's certainly a few in-depth mechanics here and there, it's not really worth diving into. It's got large maps full of points of interest, but the exploration is still so uninteresting that I wasn't really all that incentivized to do so. The characters were bland, and while the story had some interesting aspects to it, I couldn't really find a desire to get emotionally invested in any way. I don't know how actual fans of Sword Art Online feel about the game, but to me, I didn't see anything that would have made me keep playing as a non-fan. It wasn't until I actually started watching the Alicization anime that I started noticing something interesting. You see, even though I only played a short section of Licorice, I still managed to get about 7 episodes deep into the anime. This is because Licorice's story cuts out any scene that takes place outside of its virtual world, leaving us with only Kirito's experience of his time in the underworld. Any mention of characters or stories not relevant to Alicization are cut out as well, which is pretty important since a lot of these scenes give a ton of context and explanation for what exactly is happening to Kirito and why he's in a virtual world to begin with. To be honest, it actually changed my opinion of my experience with Licorice just a little bit. Without the context and information provided by the anime, you're stuck wandering the world with no idea why you're there to begin with. It gave the whole experience a sense of mystery, as if you're just like Kirito trying to find a clue as to how you got into this situation in the first place. I don't know if there's a point where they ever bring those scenes back into the game's narrative. I assume they have to since they're pretty important to understanding what's going on, but there's no denying that this one change alone makes the game an experience that's at least somewhat unique from the original. Of course, I still wouldn't say that Licorice is an experience that is better than just watching the anime, but I think it and Kakarot prove that no matter how low effort anime games can be, that doesn't mean there's not anything worthwhile in the genre. Sure, I wouldn't call either of them a masterpiece, but they do prove that there's no reason that anime games have to be nothing more than cheap fan service, and it gives me hope that one day we'll get an anime game that has more merit than just being another way to experience the story. But maybe I'm putting more ambition into the concept of anime games than it really needs. After all, the fans haven't really been complaining, at least when it comes to the games that are actually playable, I mean. If you think you're happy with the anime games we have now, or if you'd rather them take on an evolution of their own, let me know what your opinion is in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see what I've got coming up next. This was a video from Square One, and thanks for watching.